Сьогодні ми почули з Москви чергові сигнали, що наступний рік вони готують роком війни. І це сигнали не тільки для нас. Важливо, щоб партнери це бачили. І важливо, щоб вони не тільки бачили, а й реагували. Зокрема, партнери в Сполучених Штатах Америки, які часто кажуть, що Росія начебто хоче закінчити війну, але з Росії звучить зовсім інша риторика, інші сигнали. І як офіційні розпорядження їхній армії. Треба цей настрій Росії бачити і реагувати на нього. Завтра лідери Європи зустрічаються в Брюсселі. Це дуже важлива зустріч. Результат цих зустрічей, результат Європи має бути таким, що в Росії відчули, що їхнє бажання воювати ще й в наступному році не матиме сенсу, бо Україна матиме підтримку. Це на 100% залежить від Європи. Саме Європі робити цей вибір.
UK's armed forces have warned a shadow of war looms over Europe unless it can deter Vladimir Putin's ambitions. Russia's central bank is suing Belgian bank Euroclear over the EU's plan to use frozen Russian assets to support Ukraine. Nick Martin filed this report.
Well, the Belgians have found themselves at really quite a pivotal moment in a European-wide discussion about how support for Ukraine is funded in the months and years ahead. And the reason for that is all comes down to frozen Russian assets. Now, since the Russians invaded Ukraine in 2022, more than 200 billion euros of state Russian assets have been seized. Now, they're not sitting in vaults in London or Paris or Berlin. The vast majority of those frozen assets are sitting in a company in Brussels, in Belgium, which brings the Belgians right into the middle of a debate about whether Russian assets should be used to continue to fund the defence and subsequent rebuilding of Ukraine, which is why the Belgian Prime Minister is doing the rounds, actually, with a lot of European leaders ahead of a big summit next week, because the Belgians are being lent on now to use some of those frozen Russian assets, as I say, to support Ukraine. The Belgians aren't entirely happy about this. They're worried about risk. They're worried about, in the context of the end of the war, that the Russians might go after the Belgians in a court to try and reclaim some of those assets that may or may not have been used. And the Belgians say, if Europe wants to use this money, then everybody needs to buy into the risk. And he's not exactly getting those soundings at the moment. Well, he met with Sir Keir Starmer in Downing Street a few hours ago. We've just had a readout from Downing Street on what the two discussed. The leaders welcomed the close and growing relationship, they said, between the two countries. On Ukraine, they discussed the latest on peace talks and agreed that these were at a pivotal moment for Ukraine's future. It was clear, they said, that they agreed that keeping up the economic pressure on Russia and putting Ukraine in the strongest political position would remain the only way to achieve a just and lasting peace. And they also discussed other things such as migration and immigration that the two nations have in common. Well, I caught up with the Belgian Prime Minister as he left Downing Street and asked him whether he saw himself at this pivotal point and whether he's getting the sort of assurances he wants from leaders such as Sir Keir Starmer. Does Belgium hold the key to the future defence of Ukraine?
That's a bit of a cynical question. I don't think we hold the key, but we do hold a lot of Russian assets. There's talk about a reparation loan to finance Ukraine. That's one of the options to finance Ukraine. We have to lift an option next week. Will we do it with a European solution or with a reparation loan? I'm skeptical about the loan, I'm not going to lie. That's because I'm heavily exposed to the liabilities of such an operation. But I'm a loyal European, I'm loyally pro-Ukraine. So I have said, if you want to go through with this, we could. But there are, of course, conditions, mainly the mutualization of the risk of it, a liquidity safety safety net and the idea that we do this all together. But I'm not the only one who holds immobilized assets. There are other countries like the UK, like France. If we go together, then you're under a big umbrella and you're not the only one that is exposed to all the risks. This would be the minimum conditions, and I'm glad to see that we have constructive talks about this with the Commission and also with your Prime Minister.
Constructive talks indeed, but we're far from getting the sense from the Belgians that they are getting the assurances they need, that they are all in it together. The feeling here is that Russia invaded Ukraine, and in the view of many European leaders, it seems only fair that Russian frozen assets should now be used to not only help Europe defend Ukraine, but any subsequent rebuilding of the nation post-war.